Radio friends, is your wiring out of sorts? Is it a tangled mess everywhere? Well, you need discipline in your life, and maybe you need some structure. Ed Bukont is here to talk about structured wiring, something we all could learn about and use. Coming up next on TWiRT.
This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store with outstanding service, savings, and support. Online at bgs.cc. By Broadcast Bionics with the Bionic Studio, including talk show control, social media, and visual radio. Broadcast Bionics brings exceptional audience engagement to radio and TV. By Angry Audio. Audio problems disappear when you get angry at angryaudio.com. And by Max Connect Wireless, prioritized high-speed internet service designed for transmitter sites and remote broadcasts.
Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from this microphone to that light bulb at the top of the tower. Hi, I'm Kirk Harnack in Nashville, Tennessee, in the Telos Alliance studio. Thanks a lot, Telos Alliance, for affording me a couple hours here on the Thursdays to do This Week in Radio Tech, get my guests all prepped up, and wake Suncast up and have him produce the show. It's good to be here. Hey, and our show also, real quick, is brought to you in part by Ray Top over at Radio Guide magazine. You can get to their online edition by going to radio-guide.com, radio-guide.com. The cool thing about Radio Guide is it's engineering articles, and they have more room in Radio Guide to make longer articles, so they can go more in-depth about topics that you might be interested in. Things like your station website and what it's got to have on it. Migrating to tower lighting LEDs. What are the things to watch out for when you're migrating to LEDs? Or arc flash and arc fault, which can be, according to this author, Jeff Johnson, poorly understood dangers. So check out Radio Guide at radio-guide.com. And when you get the magazine, you can see the big ad for This Week in Radio Tech. Thanks a lot, Ray Top, for your mention in Radio Guide magazine. It's for us. It's for engineers. All right. It's our 571st episode. And today we're going to talk about something that has always been a bit of a conundrum to me. And we'll talk about why that is. But we're going to bring in an expert who knows a lot about it. And that is structured cabling, structured wiring. Mine's sadly a little bit unstructured. So Ed Bukont is here to talk about this because, Ed, there's times when you're paid for your opinion, and there's times when you're paid to do things really right. Ed, welcome in. Good to see you.
Thanks, Kirk. Glad to be on the show.
Well, we're going to talk about structured wiring, and to me, well, tell you what. Why don't you tell us what structured wiring is to you? What does it mean? And then we're going to get into how it applies to broadcast. We're also going to talk about how I have screwed that up royally, and why sometimes I push back against it in certain situations. And I'm going to want you to kind of convince me that, Kirk, what you do is okay, but you really could do it better, and you ought to listen to what I'm saying. So tell me what structured wiring is to you.
Structured wiring is we call it a disciplined approach to how you integrate the facility. It's using the same cabling method throughout your facility, regardless of audio, control, IP networks, whether it's in the studios, in the offices. Try to create a foundation so that all you ever have to change in a room or in a rack is the patch cord from a jack to a device. We try to build network centers, whatever you want to call them, tech room, rack room, whatever, with cabling from every rack to a central point, not punch box or any of that. Everything is jacks at each end, so that hopefully you never have to get on a ladder again and pull another wire between any 2 points in the facility, in the racks. I've been using this approach for about 15 years, and it works when it is followed. Some of the examples of where this becomes very useful: we're all dealing with smaller staffs, smaller budgets, not a lot of time to rewire because something new came in, or maybe you, the engineer or the ops person, can't get to the station to deal with something. Now, Kirk and I are both in the Nashville area, so music acts showing up in the studio are unannounced or a common occurrence. Mm-hmm. Imagine if the band shows up and they've got a mixer. No, it could have XLR outs, it could have RCA outs, it could have quarter inch, it could have anything. You could tell a receptionist, hey, go to the little drawer in the engineering office, grab one of this cable and one of this cable,
Mm-hmm.
and any patch cord that the IT guy left lying on the floor. You plug your two cables together, and without you even being there, you get to be a hero because you just walk the receptionist through making the cable to plug into your patch panel in the studio and whatever the band brought in the way of a mixer.
Wait, Ed. Okay, this kind of blows my mind, and here's why. I have done exactly what you just showed us with Studio Hub adapters, but I've never thought to tell somebody else how to do it because it would be relatively easy, especially if you were doing a FaceTime or you could show them a pic. Hey, grab this thing and grab this thing and grab it, like you said, a patch cable that the IT guy left laying on the floor.
I've done it.
Okay, that's pretty smart. That's now okay. I want to go over a couple things you said. You said structured cabling is a disciplined approach. I just figured out my downfall right there because the word disciplined was part of your description. Okay, so no, seriously, sometimes we think, hey, we can take a shortcut, but in the end, by what we'll tell you what. After our first break, we're going to have an actual presentation from Ed. But Ed, let's chit chat a bit more about how I have made the mistake of of not doing a disciplined approach, thinking that I was better off because, hey, it's just this one thing. It's just this other one thing. And then 5 years later, well, okay, it's just these 15 things that now I got to move over here. I hate going in the attic. I'm glad you brought that up. So you're, if I'm inferring what you're implying, if you did structured cabling, and we can do, which kind of implies, category cable, Cat 5, Cat 6 type cable, that we now almost every signal we want to run in a broadcast facility can run on this kind of cable. We don't have, remember Belden 8541 cable, right? Or whatever we were using. Yeah. Yes. We used to have stereo audio cable. We had coax cable. And of course, there's some places where you still have to bring some coax and some RG6 or something, or half inch or whatever. But for the most part, and there was telephone cabling that was different than the broadcast cabling. And there was the computer network, which is what we've all migrated to. So you're saying, and I know you're right, that almost every cable in the facility, inside the facility, can be category cable.
And we can even extend that to fiber. Fiber is becoming ubiquitous and cheaper because copper cabling takes copper that's becoming very expensive. You wrap a copper cable in plastic, that same plastic could be make fiber.
So here's where go ahead.
If you look at the cost per channel or cost per gigabit, fiber is usually cheaper than copper now, unless you have a very small channel count.
Gotcha. So my approach, I mean, to me, just moving to Cat 6 and audio over IP was a huge improvement over individual stereo analog or single pair AES EBU. The AOIP really cut down the number of wires that I had to pull in a facility. I still remember helping an engineer to build out a couple of stations in Memphis, Tennessee, back in the early 1990s. And we were pulling just thousands of feet of Belden twisted shielded pair, and then ringing them out in order to label them. He didn't buy the cable that had multiple pairs in it. He bought individual, and it took days to ring out and identify the cables, and then punching them down. Okay, we know we're past that. We're into AOIP, but Ed, here's where I've screwed up. And excuse me for talking here because you're going to address the things that I've messed up. I thought I have a good enough advantage here with AOIP. I'll just run 2 or 3 Cat 6 cables down to that control room down the hall. And I would have, like an Axia power station that had its own built-in Ethernet switch in it. And I would have another cable that'd be for the business network. And I have a little small switch for the business network down there. But I started to find out that seems like every few months we need to pull another Cat 5 cable somewhere.
Yes.
And we're going to add another computer here, and our switch is out of ports. We're going to pull another cable. And so I'm feeling like, well, I did this wrong because I'm having to pull additional cables. And wouldn't it have been actually cheaper in the first place to go ahead and pull, I don't know, 8 or 10 Cat 6 cables to each room that's a broadcasting room, plus, of course, cables to the offices and so forth, and then bring them out to patch panels as you suggest. Okay,
Mhm.
you kind of made me face my own truth, which is that I felt like I was doing it right at the time, but in the grand scheme of things, I could have done it much better with structured cabling. Okay, enough of a soliloquy from me. Talk some more about
He,
how I screwed up and how structured cabling is so much
it's
a better idea.
this is why I use the word a disciplined approach, because you have to take the emotion of radio out of it, or TV or whatever. We will always need more category something, category 5, category 6, whatever, and more network ports. Going forward, we will continuously be using less of whatever we did today. Analog wiring, even AES3, uh, using a piece of twisted pair or something for control, all of that is going away. So we are past connection specific wiring. As you're saying, you used to pull a bunch of shielded 27 pair, whatever audio, 27 pair unshielded for control, 6 RG6. We used to pull a lot of different cables, and all of these were for specific purposes. If you change the device, you were often cutting something off, abandoning it, soldering something on. Oops, wait a minute. We've got to turn the console off in order to solder. And I have a picture here of one of those, what ended up happening. So we want to get past connection specific wiring. We're going to put in Cat 5, Cat 6, whatever you decide you want to use, all wired TIA 568B. That is the standard. We can talk about why there's also A. And then, unless you end up going to fiber, which is becoming just as ubiquitous, all you ever change is the patch cord in the device at the end of it.
Yeah.
I have a picture there of the Audinate Avio, along with all the other audio adapters. Because once I've wired it to do even a baseband audio or AES, as I then want to move into AOIP, I'm just changing the device at the end of the patch cord. I'm not pulling another cable. Some of the standards out there let you use the 4 pairs in different ways for audio, analog, digital, control, power. So the idea is to get past what am I doing today and put the wiring in that will let me change as my needs change tomorrow.
Okay. All right. I hear you. And I like where we're going with this. I also like the fact that, sometimes we think about if we're going to do structured cabling, well, then, but I'm not all AOIP. I still run analog and AES EBU around in my plant. Well, guess what? That same cable will carry analog and
That's
AES
what I'm saying,
EBU.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I want to dispel a myth, which I've just recently done a facility with a 50 kilowatt AM and a 5 kilowatt AM, and we did it all on unshielded cable. Because
Yeah.
when you look at the structure of this cable and the improvements in electronics, the reasons that we needed shielded cable, even around AM transmitters, are just not as, uh, we just don't have as much of that problem of interference. If you've bought decent cable, you've done a decent job of wiring, you've bought decent equipment at the end, we're using it with a mix of stuff. And I was even surprised because the tech room, the 3 racks of the tech room are right next to the 50 kilowatt transmitter. And the director of engineering in that project said, we've done this a few times now. We've been lucky. Let's hope our luck holds out. And it did. In that facility, we replaced 8 8 25 pairs in each studio with 2 Cat 6s.
Yeah.
One's going to the core and the other's going to the computer. The rest, I wish I could share pictures of the facility, but we literally took out Rubbermaid barrels full of patch cords and adapter cables and things that people have used over the years.
We're going to look at your presentation here in just a few minutes. We're going to take a quick break right now. It's Kirk Harnack, and this week in Radio Tech, we're talking to Ed Bukont, and we're covering the topic of structured cabling and how it's really it's not only is it time, it's kind of past time for us as broadcast engineers to be building facilities using structured wiring techniques. We're going to hear from our friends at Broadcast Bionics and Camera One. We'll be right back in just a minute.
Camera One from Broadcast Bionics. Designed to bring video to your audio content, visualizing radio and podcasts for social media. Camera One can automatically create, capture and brand professionally switched video for live streaming or upload, making your production shareable. Control and configure using a web browser on any device. Camera One is available as a 4-camera or 8-camera system using the Blackmagic A10 Mini range, including the A10 Mini Extreme. You can use cameras to suit your studio and your budget. You'll need one camera for a studio wide shot and usually one camera per microphone. A standard multi-channel sound card or IP driver monitors audio from each studio microphone, and we work natively with Axia systems. Ideally, this will be a post-fader feed from each mic, although you can use pre-fade audio or a mic split if that's all you have available. These audio levels are used to intelligently switch the video feed when each contributor is talking. You can also group microphones together into one shot and use the audio from a mixer's aux bus. You can use Camera One's auto switch feature, or disable it and switch using the on-screen buttons or the buttons on the A10. Recordings can automatically start when you tell the system you're on the air. This on-air indication can be linked to your studio's red lights via IP or an Avantec Adam GPIO interface. You can quickly browse all the videos that have been automatically created during your broadcast, download them and post. Camera One is a user-installable system. You'll need a good spec Windows 10 PC, i7 with plenty of storage and 16 gig of RAM. It's better if this machine isn't used for anything else. Remember, you can control the software in a web browser on another device on your network. Camera One, a thrifty way of creating scroll-stopping video from your show or podcast from Broadcast Bionics.
I can highly recommend two things to you. Number one is the company behind that, Broadcast Bionics at bionic.radio. Yeah, that's a web address. Go to bionic.radio and you'll go to their website. And I can recommend this Camera One system. It's really intelligent. It's so cool and slick, and it's easy to use. Helps you make these great clips, either broadcasting your whole show on video or just make great social media clips. Thanks a lot to Broadcast Bionics and Camera One for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, back to Ed Bukont. We're talking about structured cabling. Ed, why don't you carry us through this presentation, and then I promise you I'll have some questions for you. What would you like to start with?
I guess we could start with that first slide. So we joke, but
Just kidding.
you know, what's wrong with this picture?
Mm-hmm.
And I forget. I don't know if it was you, Kirk. Somebody suggested this picture when I was doing this for SBE presentation, but this is a problem. We have a lot of people who might want to be in the technology field who have no idea what they're doing. And when we try to hire people, we're dealing with a skills gap, but we don't necessarily have as much of that skills gap in the structured wiring world. You can hire a company to come in and pull and terminate and test all of that wiring. I did one project in particular in 2013 where it was a university project. They insisted that we couldn't do any of our own wiring. It all had to go through the wiring contractor. I wasn't going to do multi-pair anyway, but we gave them a list of what we needed pulled everywhere. The entire building was done by one contractor. They pulled it all, they terminated it, and they tested it. About halfway through the project, the foreman comes up to me and he's like, "Is this a radio station we're building?" Because nobody had bothered mentioning that. And I'm like, "Well, yeah, it happens to be so-and-so." And he's like, "You all run that local music thing where bands come in and compete." I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a drummer in one of those bands. I'm going to make sure all your cabling's done right." You get some buy-in when you start doing things that aren't just radio. And he did show up at one event dressed like he was a member of KISS, and was very happy to be playing on the wiring he had put in. this gives us the ability to do more that everybody else is doing at a lower cost. If you're sitting there trying to convince the general manager that you need $2,000 worth of cable just for the radio studios,
Right.
you take that $2,000 and you go to the business manager, and now your wire pulling cost is part of sales and programming. They're not going to notice the wires you're pulling to the studios.
So, Ed, let me give you a couple of examples, and I don't mean to jump into your presentation here, but I want to emphasize and dovetail something that you said. It was actually 15 years ago from right now that someone at Minnesota Public Radio pointed out to me the extreme advantage of using structured cabling. And they said, look, when we built out new studios at Minnesota Public Radio, and we had a wiring contractor come in and pull all the Cat 5 cables. And we added up how many we would need and then added a little bit. But we had a contractor pull all this cabling for us, terminate it, and test it. We had documentation that says these cables are good to these points. And so think of and that's what cabling contractors do for a living. They have the tools and the techniques to get cabling up through ceilings and up walls and across here and across there, and hopefully to hang it properly so it's not laying over, heating vents and things like that. So they can do all that. So I got introduced to that 15 years ago. I wish I would have taken the lesson a little bit better. The last studio that I personally built, a small studio in the little town of Indianola, Mississippi, I built the whole studio without lifting the soldering iron once, except once. I forgot to bring I forgot to bring a studio hub adapter that went from RCA cable, or I forgot to bring one of these to just go from RCA, from IHF audio level to +4 right here. And so I had to make my own RCA cables to XLR or whatever it was I was doing. You know what? I think I took a Cat 6 cable or Cat 5e cable and cut the end off and stripped it and then put RCA males on the end of that. So poor planning. I was trying so hard not to have to break out the soldering iron.
That's why we have the pigtail version, so you can make your own, solder on whatever you want. But that goes to the same sort of thing. If you've built your facility or you're building it, and there's going to be changes because somebody's going to change something in the middle of the project. If you've already disciplined your wiring approach, it's much cheaper, faster to go, all right, I got to change something at each end, but I don't have to change all the wiring that I've pulled. Aside from the technical aspect, I also approach this as a business case for structured wiring, because especially as we're dealing with smaller budgets and smaller staffs, and sometimes, we're dealing with one guy is now responsible for 18 stations. You don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time.
I think we have a slide that relates to this, don't we? Next slide. Yeah, here we go.
We can go.
These are some general reasons why to do structured.
But, we can go to the slide. Sure.
Pop that up, yeah.
So, this presentation came out of something else I did that we were making it as the business case for structured wiring. So the technical reasons are fairly well known, and we can go over more of that. But I've been doing this for 40 years, and some folks have only been doing it for 10 or 20. And you reach a point where you realize that maybe I don't want to be breathing in, fumes from soldering, or the repetitive motion injuries of lots of crimping and punching down and, doing work underneath on your knees, or one facility where the punch blocks were underneath the tabletop, literally horizontal underneath the tabletop, not on the wall.
You have to lay on your back and look upwards and punch and have little scraps fall off into your eye.
Oh, there was no cable restraint, so this was just waterfall in your face as you're trying to work, and it was really very interesting. So,
and add to that point, I'm sure you've done this. Remember when we used to sit in front of a wall of punch blocks and maybe on an overturned 5-gallon bucket for a seat, right? And you would sit there and you'd be punching. You talk about repetitive motion injuries.
Yes.
And I didn't even know there was a word for that back then. And sure enough, you'd go home and think, what is wrong with my hand? Well,
now we call it carpal tunnel syndrome. Yes.
Yeah.
But I've also I found something better than the overturned 5-gallon bucket. Discovered this purely by accident. Had a facility where we had to add a microphone patch panel at the last minute from the stage to the relocated mixer position. Anyway, folks at Redco did me a beautiful job. They punched a panel overnight, sent it down. All I had to do was solder it in. But it was tight against the wall. I couldn't even get the regular chair in there to fit. And there was the drummer's stool. I carry a drummer's stool. It was perfect for sitting there in front of a rack or a wall or whatever and getting in close and doing the work. That's
I think our next picture we got a picture of some of the materials that we need to be.
Yes, I should have put the drummer's stool in there.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, go.
Suncast, let's see the material slide if you got that. Or maybe you don't. This would be slide number 3, I believe.
Yeah. Yep.
I think so. Yeah.
It was just like a slide of text and then a slide of.
So these materials now. Yeah. Here we go. Yeah. What are we looking at here? And
this is all ubiquitous stuff. This is stuff that you can literally buy at the hardware store. A lot of this now, but in the middle of the picture is sort of some secret sauce of how you really do this. The bundle of blue and the bundle of white cables. Those are commercially available bundles of 6. In this case, the blue are unshielded cables and the white are shielded. There's 6 Cat 6 shielded or unshielded, terminated, tested in the length of your choice. We can build a 3-rack tech center in 4 hours. You take those pre-made cables and the blank panels that are down there on the left, and you get your girlfriend, your wife, your boyfriend, whatever to help you. You get up on, you pull the bundles through, plug them into the back of the patch panels, screw it in the rack, and now you're ready to add your drop cables for all your various equipment. You're not up there on the ladder or, ordering 8 boxes of cable so you can pull all these runs at once, and now you've got 8 half-empty boxes of cable. The folks in the IT world refer to this as TOR wiring, top of rack wiring. Oh. I was doing it. I didn't know it had a name, but that's what they call it. And there's also bottom of the rack and middle of the rack. That's different. All of the materials are readily available. Where you can buy them at DigiKey, various online, but you could go to some hardware stores, and if you're lucky enough to have a micro center, that's even better. But if you look at the cost, I've done. Say you had a 200-foot run of 6 Cat 5 cables, all pre-made, wrapped in Tech Flex. That's a couple $100. If you went to the same cabling pre-wire place and asked them to make you 6 AES-3 cables with XLR connectors for 200 feet, that's several hundred. It's 2 or 3 times the price of the Cat 6. Now you look at that Cat 6. I can get up to 4 AES cables per Cat 6 cable. I can reduce my 6 AES cables to 2 Cat 6s. The numbers justify the expense of the materials because you can do more with the Cat 5 or 6 cable, and you can install it faster. You can have other people do it that might either be cheaper or faster, more readily available labor. The materials sometimes cost a little more than traditional analog wiring methods. But as the price of copper goes up and the weight of a roll of copper something versus the weight of Cat 5, you start looking at shipping costs. Your labor savings is substantial. As an integrator, you might say, well, why do I... What?
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, as an integrator, you say, well, why would I want to save labor? Because, I don't want a turn-away business. I want to get the job done. I don't want to sit there punching wires. That can be a competitive disadvantage. Your project is going to get more expensive of punching wires versus getting in, doing the structured wiring, getting you connected back on the air and move on to the next project.
So I'm curious about I think they're often called Keystone Connectors. And if we go back to that slide,
yes,
Suncast, the top 2 left connectors there, And then compare that to the rack panel at the bottom left. How are the? I can't say I'm really excited about stripping a Cat5 cable and laying the conductors into the little valleys there and pushing that tab over it. That's
right.
can I terminate with an RJ45 and plug in the back of something?
And that is the whole idea. That's you, instead of buying a patch panel where you've got to punch down on the back, you do everything to the keystones and you just snap them in. And that's why the BNC is there. Maybe you don't fill up an entire panel in a small studio, but you're going to pull some Cat something in there. Instead of drilling a panel and putting some feed throughs in and finding the nut and the washer and everything else, you got you got a few jacks positions left over in the keystone panel. You could buy the BNCs or an F or an RCA, whatever. You use the same wiring approach for everything. So you don't have a panel over there with BNCs. On the other side of the room, you've got your RJ45s for the phone, but on the other wall, you got your RJ45s for the audio. The idea is to pull everything to one place, preferably terminate it all in one type of connector, but still, this is the disciplined approach. Trying to keep everything in a similar fashion so that when you have to make a change, you don't have to go, where, what side, how long? Okay, you're putting all your wiring in this place in the studio. Everything can be measured from that point. You have a much easier idea of making changes, adding something, directing somebody else to a point. If you're going to have your favorite furniture vendor build your furniture for the studios, you bring everything out to Keystones. The furniture shows up. You cut a 1 by 1, a 1 foot by 1 foot hole in the back of the furniture. You shove the keystones in. You pop them into the panel. You're not waiting for the furniture guy to show up before you can finish your wiring. Your wiring is done. You wrapped it in a plastic bag. The painter and everybody else have done their job in the facility. Slide the furniture in. Plug it into the patch panel. Plug in your devices. I've built studios in as little as a day or two. I've made changes.
If Suncast will take me full screen, I want to show you something. I recently wanted to do a demo of how a piece of gear from Omnia, the MPX node, the micro MPX node, would let you have two IP paths to it, and you could remove either IP path, and it would still stay on the air. Of course, you took them both out. There's no data at all. And so I built this little patch panel, and I would have it took two patches in the front to get to demonstrate. Yes, here's one path, might be a public internet, and here's another path, might be an IP radio link or something else. Who knows? And so I did this. Now I didn't know what I was buying, Ed, and so what I bought was this, and you can see I had to punch down my wires on the back.
Yes.
Now I must say this provided me the demo I wanted, but that's not the method that I can't say I enjoyed doing that. And I'm asking you, is there a better way than this to affect this? Okay, tell me about it.
I have a large example of it, but it's the same thing. So this is, we'll show you for the front. That's your punched panel available. This happens to be a 2RU version with 48 or 24 jacks. They make you can still get this kind of version in higher densities. And on the back, it's just that. It's just place to clip. You take your keystone and you're doing it for that side. You hook it in the little groove. You snap it in. You could have punched this down before. They make little devices to hold in your hand and punch, but you snap that in. You've had somebody else maybe has come and punched this down, or even if you've done it, you're not trying to do it to the back of the panel, because I don't know how many times I've had to show this to somebody. That's great. You can punch down all those wires and put it in the panel. What are you going to do when something happens to one of these, one of the connectors, something happens to a connector? Maybe liquid gets in it, whatever. Yeah. You've got all these patch cords coming out the front, going to your switches and such. You can't take this panel back out of the rack later to service a patch point. If you use structured wiring approach, well, you've brought everything out to a keystone. You take your favorite screwdriver, you push the thing down, you pull it out,
pops right out. Yeah, yeah, just that one.
fix the jack, right? Well, one, fix the jack and pop it back in. This is the way to build a facility. Yes,
I like that.
it will. Some will say that the punch down panels are cheaper, but we have to be building for serviceability and change. You want to be able to pull the jack out. Maybe you're going to pull that out and replace it with an LC connector for fiber as you get rid of copper. Copper or fiber for audio is becoming a reality. Whether you're talking Dante or NDI and its use of audio and video, of course, the whole Telos live wire approach has been structured wiring going back to 2003, something like that.
Yeah. In fact, I got to visit years ago. I got to visit WOWO, WOWO in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I must say, at the time, I don't know where they are now, but at the time, their studio building at the transmitter site was nothing more than pre-manufactured building sections bolted together. It was not a substantive building. And there was a lot of RF. There was, at the time, 50 kilowatts. I think it's been decreased to 10 kilowatts or something. But anyway, at the time, it was 50 kilowatts day and night. And so they figured we might have a problem with RF on these longer runs, because their studios were all kind of long runs from the cable room. And so point is, they were the first facility to do all their major runs on fiber. They put in Axia gear, live wire, AOIP, but all their runs were fiber. And it was pretty cool that they thought to do that, and they bought a fiber switch, and anyway, it all worked out fine. It was very terrific, and no large amounts of RF were brought in or antennaed in by copper. So we're talking to Ed Bukont. Ed, we're going to take a quick break right now. We're talking to Ed Bukont about structured cabling, and I'm learning some things about what's actually available out there. Might be a good idea to go see a facility that's been done properly with structured wiring, and see, okay, what accessories, what things do I need to buy? What's going to be useful to me, and that looks sexy, but I actually don't need that. So that would be interesting to do, to look at, to get a good feel for what you might need for your next build. This week in Radio Tech, our 571st episode is brought to you in part by Broadcasters General Store. BGS has all kinds of things you need to build your facility, including structured wiring, parts and pieces. And one of those things that they have are broadcast tools. Now, if you're familiar with Don Wingett and his broadcast tools company, then you know the amazing array of things that broadcast tools built. And one of those is a little audio console. It's called the Pro Mix 4. And we're still hyped up about this console because it's so easy for you to use. You can just about send your morning team out with the Pro Mix 4 to do a live remote. It's simple and easy to use. You can use it for like voiceover work inside the building. You can certainly use it for remotes, for emergency broadcasting, keep one at the transmitter site, for example. But let's see if we can throw a picture of the Pro Mix 4 up here, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. The Pro Mix 4 has 4 faders on it. Now, they're the rotary faders. So you're going to kind of set them and maybe forget them, but you can run them up and down if you need to. It is a mono console. It's not even stereo. Well, because if you're going to use it just for microphones, that's probably what you need. If you're going to use it for sports broadcasting, parade coverage, broadcasting from the transmitter side, if something really goes wrong with the studio, you're going to want to use the Pro Mix 4. It has the inputs on it. It's got those combo connectors, the XLR and 1/4-inch tip ring slim combo connector, so you can plug in either kind of connector to it. It also has a 4th input that can be either USB audio from a computer to which it's connected, or it can be a line level input that's on the back as well. So it's got 3 universal mic mono level input channels, 1 mono balanced line input, and then of course that USB connection for USB audio. And that of course means it delivers USB audio to your laptop or computer. And that means you've got access to whatever connectivity that you want from that laptop. You can be running some kind of a codec in there. You can be running, Lucy Live or something like that to send audio back to a codec at the radio station. By the way, this Pro Mix 4 also has a mix minus output. So if you need to have a phone, a codec like a Telos HX1 or some other a phone hybrid, I should say, sitting right there, well, you can do it. Or I said codec, if you have a wired codec next to you, something from Telos or Tieline or Comrex, you can plug that in and you've got your mix minus built right in there. It also has an IFB audio input with level adjustment, full duplex talkback capability if you also get the ProMix Hub 6 controller. That's sold separately, but you can get that and you start to get a whole production system for live sports broadcasting. Now, it does have 3 quarter-inch stereo headphone outputs. So the headphone amps are built in, independent volume, IFB pan, and program pan. It gives you custom mixes for each individual headphone output. It does have an on-air tally or warning light relay output, so you can light a light to let people know you're on the air. And you can drive multiple headphone systems with the AHR1 Plus headphone system. You can combine it with other products from Broadcast Tools and you have more flexibility and more connectivity. It is a cool little box. Don Wingett, like most of his boxes, he really puts it together to give you a complete solution, really convenient solution too. It does have a built-in audio limiter, so when your sportscaster says he shoots, he scores, it'll keep you from getting distortion on the output. So check it out. The place to get it is Broadcasters General Store. The website, bgs.cc, or of course you can call them. They are really set up to talk to you, real people having conversations, helping you figure out what you want to buy, what the delivery time is, and what your best price is. 352-622-7700. That's 352-622-7700 for Broadcasters General Store. Thanks a lot, BGS, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. Talking to Ed Bukont. Ed is talking about structured wiring. Ed's built a lot of studios under a lot of, let's say, specifications, conditions. Ed, I think you've built quite a few government facilities that have to do with local, state, county, and federal governments. So, you've got a lot of rules to follow, and structured wiring probably fits right into what they want.
The benefit to structured wiring, which generally meaning category 5 or 6 wiring, is your electrical inspector, especially, but even building inspectors, they're used to seeing this cable, white,
Sure.
orange, whatever. Yes, you do want to, of course, follow the code. If you have a plenum ceiling concern, you need to use plenum rated cable. But when they walk in, they're not as likely to ask a bunch of questions and hold up your project, or make you rip it out and start over, which they can do if they see that you're using something that's understood, something that's accepted across multiple industries. There was a situation in Baltimore where the electrical inspector was very unhappy at 2 very large broadcasters. And when he got to the next facility radio person building, he told them, I'm not letting you put in all that large black 27 pair, whatever you call it. I want to see the Cat 5 wiring because you don't give me good data on that flame tests and all. 45,000 feet of Cat 6 and 2,000 RJ45s later, there was no analog wiring except in the performance space, and there were 50 XLRs used in the entire facility. Everything else was, and we have not pulled another cable in almost 10 years.
You mentioned that, the value over time and being able to bypass things or make easy changes. Slide 4 here, Suncast. Slide 4 is a picture that I think Ed's going to want to tell us about. And when you see this picture, folks, you're going to say, "Well, what happened here, Ed?" I'm sure there's a story.
Yeah, this place had some early version of structured wiring, but from 2 different vendors. And a well-meaning engineer kind of came up with a system for integrating them. But either way, it was not compatible to unplug one device and bypass the plug into the other. So they had mic processors that were inserted to the insert point on the console. Mic processor died. He had no way to bypass it. Whatever connector came out of the console wasn't the same as what went into the processor. So he literally chopped the ends off of the wire from a different processor with a different connector, and twisted them together and shoved it back into furniture to get the morning show on. Several years later, a new morning guy with longer legs sits at the console, stretches his feet, and kicks this wire that didn't even have wire nuts on it, shorts the mic out, and I didn't have any microphone for a few hours until somebody got there, and somebody being me, and I'm like, what? What? So I cut that off, and on one of the other slides, I do show an RJ45 to screw terminal adapter. We use that to then make it conform to this wiring standard and put a patch cord between it so that until such time as we could rewire the place, at least they wouldn't have wires, dissimilar wires under the furniture twisted together, for lack of a better way of explaining it.
Wow. Let's say the next slide here is one of these slides with lots of bullet points, but it's worth going through. So let's see that slide. Was it 5?
I think.
Suncast. All right. Take us through these bullet points, business and technical concerns.
Right.
Go ahead.
It's once you have done the wiring system, it's easier to make changes even for non-technical personnel. Whether you've got to direct somebody, because if you've got people doing webcasts and podcasts and you've got other users in the station who are using a computer, they could probably plug in a patch cord from the computer. So instead of you doing all of it, you can direct them. Here, go to Jack, X9 and let them plug their stuff in. Maybe you're even directing an IT contractor or somebody you've got, the contract engineer, whatever. You can direct people to do things that they're not going to be afraid to do. Whereas sometimes if you're asking people to plug things in, the first thing they ask is, am I going to get electrocuted doing this? The wiring system is recognized in electrical, fire, and safety codes, whereas a lot of what we do in broadcast is sometimes an exception. The method is repeatable, even predictable. It's very reliable. Buy decent materials, it's reliable. And it's easily scalable. You buy a 24-port patch panel, and maybe you don't fill it up today, but the space is there to plug in more connectors, more keystones, or whatever later, versus trying to find space on the wall for another punch block. Or the one that just kills me is when the punch blocks are across the rack and you can't get to the back of the equipment, so you waste half of the rack with punch blocks and the other half of the equipment. We get past all that. Flexibility, we've all been in the back of particularly radio, maybe more than TV, but we've all gone to the back of a rack in the studio. And if the studio's old enough, they had one kind of cart machine and then another. And then they had a kind of CD player and maybe a mini disc. And all along, they kept cutting off the connector or making an adapter. So you've got an XLR to a D connector to a 1/4 inch to another D connector to an RCA, because it could never solder on another connector. So they made a string of adapters. You've got 5 pounds of adapters hanging in there. You got 3 CD players. You got 15 pounds of connectors hanging there. The wiring approach lets you go to that end and very quickly change an adapter when you change a device. Some of this stuff, yes, there are brands that are specific to audio and media, but you can roll your own to some degree, or you can make things in an emergency. You can take an RJ45, that we call a hockey puck, and wire that out to make an audio adapter if you had to for some reason. Sometimes we get creative. You can buy 25 pair Cat 5 and still do something similar in the way of having a mult. All of this, the IT world and the AV world have been using for several years. We're kind of new to it because of some fear of reliability. But, the New York Stock Exchange runs on this kind of wiring. It's reliable. There are some brands I wouldn't recommend buying, but that's a different conversation.
Actually, it wouldn't be. Maybe if you don't want to speak poorly of somebody, what brands are worth looking at? Because I like you have heard some horror stories. Hey, we bought a whole bunch of these patch cables and half of them turned out to be bad. I bought some computers not too long ago from a reliable builder, and the guy's great, and he made good on the computers, but he used a new SCSI, not SCSI, what's the little, SATA. He used a new SATA cable from the motherboard to the hard drives, the solid state hard drives, and they started getting janky. They're stupid, and it caused us lost airtime and difficulty. And so, just because something's finished and molded and looks good doesn't mean it's good. What would you recommend?
If they're charging you, if you're going to go online and you find the company that is selling you materials like, and kind of back to your point about not even punching down anything, you can buy so-called feed-through connectors to snap into the panel. So you buy a pre-made cable, that's an RJ45, and then, so each end is an RJ45. Well, there's a company that is very similar to not being stereo. And
okay,
they sell their feed-through connectors at $1 for 50 of them. And we did a facility because that's what the director of engineering wanted to use. And a year later, it seemed to be temperature related. For whatever came summer, the air conditioning running more, we don't know what. But across 10 racks, we started losing feed-through connectors. It was a problem.
Okay, all right.
Another benefit to this, because you can bring in, say, if you're in a large enough organization, you can bring in your IT department and get some kumbaya with them.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to figure out how to do this, or you're trying to figure out how to afford it, you go to the IT guys. Do you have a book of standards how you wire things? Usually they're like, well, why do you care? You're broadcast. You don't. I do care. You take their standard. You do this structured wiring to their standard. Mm-hmm. It's much easier to sell it to management when you say, well, the IT guys can use it as well. It's to their standards. We can use their contractor. Suddenly it's seen as better for the organization because we're using the same thing everywhere, the same contractor. Maybe you're buying materials in bulk.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than radio being the exception and often the expensive exception, you're part of the standard. You're seen as working on the team rather than being a renegade. That worked out very well for me, particularly in colleges and government, to get some buy-in to what we're trying to do.
One on slide 8, there's a couple of points I want to make sure that we hit. Suncast, if you want to pop slide 8. We've been talking about common infrastructure, the fact that you can do video and other kinds of signals over Cat 5 and Cat 6. You can also use baseband audio over this. But I like your last point on this slide. Maybe you want to hit some other ones, Ed, when Suncast gets the slide up here. Slide 6, if I misspoke, slide 6. And that is you reduce the risk of errors in wiring. With broadcast stuff, we always have to look at the colors and the pins that they're going to. There's a lot to kind of look at. And let's go back to that. What is structured wiring, which I think is slide 6. What is structured wiring? There we go. Yeah. Reduce the risk of errors in wiring. And yeah, you can make an error in punching colored coded, wires down to a little thing and making an RJ45 connector, but it's so easy to test. You plug them into a little, literally a $7 tester and see if you got wired right. Talk about that.
It is easy to test, but there's a little more to it even than that. If you didn't wire a facility, you come in and you want to make a change, you open up an XLR connector. Hopefully you open it instead of assuming. And you see, okay, the red is on pin 2, the black is on pin 3. You really have no idea if the entire place was done that way. Or if you bought some you bought a harness from somebody, you're breaking out the output of some computer or whatever. You don't know. Whereas because the 568B is a standard used across almost every industry now, and most of the patch panels and such have the color code on it, your chances of an error in wiring through the plant are greatly reduced versus the risk of somebody took a two-pair audio. Did they use the white and the green for a pair? Did they use the black and red for a pair? Which did they use for ground? Which was hot? All of this sort of emotional stuff, that's how we've done it for the last 50 years, goes away. You have a standard. That's how the plant is wired. Regardless of who wired it or which contract, you tell them we're using 568B. It's a thing. You can test to it.
I'm realizing we got a few more slides to move through, and we're running low on time. The next page, adapting products. You can't always use an RJ45 with what you want to touch with your hands and deal with it. Sometimes you got to break it out. Sometimes you need to adapt different things. Talk to us about what we're looking at.
So you've got your wiring, so to speak, your structured wiring, and you've got legacy equipment that for whatever reason you can't put an adapter on, or you're trying to reduce the amount of wiring. What this slide is showing is there are different approaches. You can buy a fair amount of products have a DB25 on the back. You buy an adapter to go to XLRs or to the RJ45s. Even if that device doesn't have XLRs or RCAs or whatever connector you wanted to use, you can break it out to the connector of choice using one of these harnesses. Or you can buy any of the other little guides shown there, an RJ45 to screw terminals or a RJ45 jack to screw terminals. You can adapt your existing plant. If you're moving from analog to digital and you want to have a parallel facility, the ability to plug something in with an RJ45 and then plug in the DB25 and get another set of connections in parallel is a wonderful thing. You can keep your old automation system going while you put the new automation system, or your old console going while you put in the new console, or both, like as I've recently done. That was a whole lot of fun. Because it's a standard, you can buy things to adapt versus trying to make your own adapters. You probably don't have the time to, especially in our current economic climate where it's very hard to even get supplies. Having a standard, being able to then have multiple resources that might meet the standard. You can buy your stuff from multiple companies is a wonderful thing.
Let's look at the next slide, products using standard connectors. So we have, and when you say standard connectors, you're meaning RJ45.
An RJ45 wired to TIA 568B. There are some others out there using an RJ45. They're not necessarily following that standard. Most of the audio world, most of the broadcast audio world is using the Studio Hub adaptation. There are some others out there. And our friends at Angry Audio make adapters to go from some of those other flavors of RJ45 to the Studio Hub standard. But this isn't just a manufacturer-specific thing anymore. If you look at the cost of a patch cord, a 1-foot patch cord that you might use for a lot of things, they're $1. You can't buy the 2 XLRs to solder onto a piece of 8451 for $1.
It's worth pointing out for those who may not realize it, that an RJ45 connector like this one right here, and this is going to be the Studio Hub standard because it's on a piece of audio equipment. This puts out pro audio here. It's gold plated. I mean, if there's ever any wiggling there, and the RJ45 that goes on it is gold plated. If there's any wiggle there, the connection gets better. The gold rubs against gold, and the connection gets better. That's why gold plated was chosen by telcos or whoever invented these RJ connectors years ago. I got a little collection of stuff that, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here to some degree, but I'm going to make a point. So here is one of these Max Connect wireless jobs. We're going to hear an ad from them in just a minute. Of course, it has RJ45 connectors. They're Ethernet right there. I mean, that's actual Ethernet. Here we have an Angry Audio Studio Hub, an Angry Audio, I should say, headphone gizmo, and it's got a couple of RJ45s. But these are the Studio Hub standard, carrying analog audio and power. Here is another Studio Hub product, and it's got RJ45s. It's got 3 of them on there. One is for power, and one is for balanced stereo in analog, and one's for AES EBU digital out. And again, all on these reliable connectors. Here's one. Here's a Studio Hub headphone amp that's also got RJ45s. And so, yeah, these connectors are everywhere. They may be carrying different standards of stuff, but in the structured wiring, it's all exactly the same. It might be important to know what's on the other end of that structured wiring cable, right? So you're not trying to plug Ethernet into Studio Hub, but that's easy enough to solve and
it
to
happens.
Know. Rarely does something blow up, but it could happen.
But that's also true. Rarely does something blow up. There are people who are worried about PoE blowing up their stuff. PoE is a standard. It's probably not going to blow up your stuff. It's taking the non-standard device and plugging it into your network switch and introducing a voltage from something else that might blow something up. This is a known.
And on PoE, especially if it's active PoE and not just a dumb passive PoE, if it's got any smarts at all, it's not going to deliver PoE until it's asked to deliver PoE. Hey, Ed, we got to take our final break, and I guess the point I was making there with all this stuff is that I've been great myself, like many other engineers, at adapting to an RJ45 Cat5 world, but I haven't done a very good job of implementing structured wiring. I haven't gone over that threshold of learning and implementation yet. And thank you. You've really helped me to, the next project that I do, I will not be walking through that or crawling through the attic, pulling individual Cat5s. I will get somebody to do that cabling. We'll terminate it properly into patch bays, and then I'll patch it where it needs to go. And that's, thanks to your encouragement and education on this. We're going to have some educational resources in the show notes, but we're not leaving yet. We got a quick break to check out. We'll be right back. Oh, I guess it's me. Hey, we're talking. Actually, I've kind of already did the ad, right? We talked about Studio Hub Angry Audio and their products. This is the Angry Audio headphone amp. This is the one, Ed, that you won't snag your pantyhose on. I hate that when that happens. When I snag never mind. But this is a great headphone amp. And then you have this kind, the original Studio Hub design that fits in a Decora box with a Decora plate on it. So it fits into your furniture just great. You can actually daisy chain 4 of these together on the same power supply, and they will run like that. On this one, you can daisy chain about 3 of them on the same power supply and have them all. They each has an individual volume control, of course, though. And both of these take, as I say, both kind of headphone plugs, country and Western. So you've got that. Oh, and speaking of headphone plugs, you know what else our friends at Angry Audio have? They now have these things called Headphone Disconnectors. So you just put this in series with your headphone cable for your talent, your dumb talent that forgets they're wearing headphones and gets up and walks away from the table. And look at that. It just comes right apart. It's a MagSafe type of audio connector there for stereo audio. And also you have the 1/4 inch size, tip ring sleeve, 1/4 inch. Same thing. Talent gets up, walks away, boop, like that. I talked to an engineer a couple weeks ago who said, I just spent an hour resoldering and remaking and fixing a headphone amp and putting a new jack on it because that one had gotten torn up. So they have these at Angry Audio. And the last thing I want to show you that Angry Audio has, this fits right in with our discussion of structured cabling. This is a world panel from Angry Audio. And on the back, it uses all RJ45 connectors. There is power. It's an active world panel. It's buffered. It doesn't really amplify, but it buffers the audio. And so if some TV station comes in and plugs a wayward piece of equipment in that maybe has a leakage or 110 volts on or something like that, you'll blow this up and not your valuable audio console. So this is cool. This is the world panel from Studio Hub. It is just now getting onto their website, so you want to check that out. So thanks a lot, Angry Audio, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. There's their website. It's angryaudio.com. No more broken headphones, Bluetooth audio gadgets. They have so much cool stuff there. Really doing a great job. And hey, Ed, they're just down the street from both of us in Franklin, Tennessee.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Hey, angryaudio.com is the website. We're going to hear a real quick testimonial from John Takak about the Max Connect wireless modem. We'll be right back in a second.
With all of the recent cybersecurity attacks against large corporations, we were looking for a product that would give us the ultimate security at our transmitter sites and as well as with our broadcast equipment. Max Connect fits the bill very well. Its greatest security feature is the fact that it gives you a single static IP address. Using this single static IP address allows us to close hundreds of open ports on our firewalls across the company and restrict access to only the Max Connect IPs. This has greatly reduced our exposure to the World Wide Web and made us much more secure moving forward. It has also given us the ability to expand as needed in a secure fashion.
What John's talking about is this little box right here. It is an LTE modem, 4G LTE modem, but it's more than that. It's not just the modem. It's the service. It's the Max Connect wireless service, which gives you prioritized data. You are prioritized. Your data is prioritized over all those jokers at the parade, at the football game, at the stadium, at the car crash, wherever you are. You get priority over everybody except first responders. Of course, they have the first priority, but they're not using a whole ton of data like all those people checking their Facebook are in the stadium. But check it out. This is the Max Connect wireless. They are doing great. So many people are putting this at their transmitter site where they can't get internet service. Ed was just talking about how people are doing that, and it's true. Max Connect wireless. We'll have the link in the show notes, maxconnect.com. Yeah, it's spelled funny. All right. Thanks a lot to Josh Bone for doing Max Connect. All right, Ed, we got to go shortly. Was there anything else that was there another slide we wanted to look at before we had to go? Oh, we talked about Studio Hub already. Let's talk about any parting advice that you'd give to people like me who I've seen structured wiring. I know I should be doing it. How do I get my feet wet? And I can hire you, I guess, to come do it.
Well, that'd be one way, yes. But for those out there in the radio land, honestly, there are a lot of resources on the web. Some years ago, they still offer it every now and then. Home Depot has a Saturday morning class in structured wiring for residential installers.
Yeah.
It's not only is it free training, but they give you a little kit with the punch tool and the stripper and a crimper and all that stuff for attending the thing. I don't know if they're still doing it, but the resources are there. This is no longer experimental. This is no longer new. It's how others are already doing it. We should be, so that we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel on how we wire and integrate facilities.
Well, with audio over IP and with things like the Studio Hub standard, there's no we're already using the stuff anyway. Let's go that extra step and do the cabling in the building and to the devices the way that the IT industry is doing it. Let's mimic that. We worked hard to make the equipment talk this way and adapt to this. Let's do the stuff between the 2 points.
I guess this is the faster, better, cheaper way to build a facility.
Yeah.
If you're looking at it from a project management holy grail kind of thing, you can make yourself happy. You can make the program director happy, because he can make changes quickly for him, and you can make the business manager happy. We're not trying to make sales happy.
Yeah. Gotcha. And the same cabling is used for whether it's the sales offices,
right,
the administrative offices, or our offices, the engineering plants, right. and the studios. Good deal. And as you mentioned earlier, we can always convert to fiber where we need to. A couple of my stations, I didn't go fiber very far. I just did a little fiber jumper, but between two fiber adapters. Like I have PoE going up the tower to an IP radio, but it might get by lightning. So it comes in the building, and then it goes through 6 feet of fiber to another adapter. If I had a switch that had PoE adapters on it, or what are those things called? The small form factor plugs.
SFPs. Yes.
SFPs. Yeah. Then I would just would have gone to that, but I didn't have a switch that would do that right then. So
I feel that's a little hint in there too. When you're doing this or you're doing anything with PoE, right away everybody wants to sell you the $1,700 switch. With every port's got PoE and 1,500 watts of power.
Yeah.
You probably don't need that, but then people shy away from it. For most of what we're doing, buy a regular switch and just buy the external PoE injector. Save your budget for the things you need. Yeah.
Well, now that the PoE switch, if you've got a call center with 58 people using VoIP phones and they all need to be powered, different. Well, maybe you are better off with the PoE switch.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Ed, I'm going to put your contact info in the show notes, so we won't have to spit them out here. But if you want to contact Ed Bukont for some consulting, for some construction, installation, that kind of thing, design work, Ed does all kinds of things like that. So Ed, thank you for. And by the way, he's going to use all Cat 5, Cat 6 cable and make it structured wiring.
That we will. Thank you.
Don't call Ed and say, Ed, I want 300 runs of 8451.
I'm going to tell you to put that on fiber and anyway.
That's right. That's right.
Because we can.
We got to run. Ed, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. Happy Thanksgiving when that comes along next week. We won't be doing a show next week, I suppose. So, all right. Hey, thanks to Suncast for producing this show. Really appreciate his work on today's show. Thanks to Andrew Zarian, the founder of the GFQ Network. I'm Kirk Harnack, and I want to thank my friends at the Telos Alliance for giving me some things to put in the studio here. Very useful things, and some time on Thursdays to do this. Thanks a lot, Telos Alliance. We're going to be back in a couple weeks, and we will talk to you then on This Week in Radio Tech.